Hello, hello, hello. This is Warren Redlick. We're going to be talking about uh, gun deaths, murder, and so on. Lots of unfortunately not fun stuff to talk about today. But I want to focus on what's been happening. I've been having these conversations on Twitter, and I thought it would be worthwhile to have these conversations on the Daily Lie. I'm recording this video. I will probably publish this video on YouTube. It's unlikely to be monetized. There's some risk of censorship by YouTube just because of the way YouTube is. That's why I have the Daily Lie, and I appreciate anybody who's watching. First of all, thanks for joining on the Daily Lie, and I would appreciate your support. The Daily Lie, there's no advertisements. This is the Locals platform, warrenredlick.locals.com. There's no advertisements on here. So any support you can give is great. Please consider supporting me on this platform. Supporters can participate in the chat and can comment on posts, and they get early access to some of my videos, and they get discounts on merch like the Be Less Wrong shirt and the Tesla stainless steel water bottle. So I've been having this conversation on Twitter. We're kind of going to go in reverse order, but I think this is a really good place to start. I did this tweet just a little while ago. Which had the fewest, this is a poll, which had the fewest gun deaths in the 20th century? United States, Europe, Asia, or I'm scared to answer. I love coming up with other fourth choices. So, Europe and Asia had World War II. Europe had World War I. Lots of people were killed by guns. Millions, maybe tens of millions of people were killed in Europe and Asia in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, the Korean War. China killed a lot of people on their own internal stuff. I'm sure there's lots of gun deaths in India and Pakistan over the course of whatever battles that they had. Part of Russia is in Asia. I don't even know what happened in Russia. The United States didn't have any wars inside the United States of any significance in the 20th century. We did have the Civil War back in the 1800s. And this is striking that roughly half of the people, more than half of the people who answered the question actually think that the United States had more gun deaths, well, that either Asia or Europe had fewer gun deaths than the United States. We didn't have wars. And I would argue that one of the reasons we didn't have the kinds of wars that they had in Europe and Asia is because we have an armed populace. We can disagree. I'm wearing the Be Less Wrong shirt for a reason. I was going to wear the Discriminate Cogitande critical thinking shirt, but I decided to wear this one instead. T-shirts at elonbits.com. Discount code for supporters, by the way, $2 off. And by the way, the merch store is incredibly slow at delivering products to customers. They'll tell you it's going to be a month. It's going to be 2 months. I'm shocked at how slow they are. But this is just an example of how, and there are people who in the replies, people are saying including wars. Like, why wouldn't you include wars? So no contest, didn't have major land battles during World War I or World War. U.S. didn't have major land battles. A peaceable, armed, educated populace helps prevent war from arriving in the home neighborhood. Yes. Even if you went, this is something I thought about before I did the poll. Should include percentage of the population per capita. It's the same result because the United States didn't have the wars by percentage of the population. Missing children has nothing to do with it. Good example of how surveys should not be done. Well, then post your own survey and tell me what's a better way. This is not constructive criticism. This is just useless criticism. Europe wars followed closely by school shooting in the United States. There were massively large numbers of people killed in Asia in the 20th century. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, the World War II. Lots of people shot in Asia in the 20th century. So, sorry, Paul. Bill Poplowski says it doesn't matter. The future is important. Well, understanding the past is useful for understanding the future. There's some famous quote, something like, those who fail to understand the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And those who understand the lessons of history are doomed to watch the other people. This is this follow-up quote. It's a corollary. Those of us who understand the lessons of history are doomed to watch the rest of you repeat the mistakes. Who has the few? So Greg Gutman, who's been like dogging me. By the way, like on a really generally anonymous account, post a profile picture. Put a profile picture up. Who has the fewest gun deaths per capita in the last 10 years? Well, okay, that's a great way of avoiding the question. You could say the last 50 years, the United States probably has more gun deaths. Yeah, I think 50 years gets us after the Vietnam War. That's kind of not the point, and I don't know the answer asking. I mean, most likely the United States has more gun deaths per capita. I don't know. We could throw Latin America in the equation, then we get a different answer. Akaret says make one option GFY, which is go after yourself. Do I count wars? Yes, I count wars. People killed by guns in wars, and wars included. Yes, if there's a war and people are shot with a gun, it's a gun death. And yeah, David King kind of hits the point. Which state actor killed more civilians in the past 2 decades? I don't know why we're restricting to 2 decades. I don't think the United States has killed a lot of civilians in other countries. I don't know. I'm not a fan of that. I love this one. I just had some fun with this one. I don't know about you, but I live in New York City, and gangs and thugs and the mentally ill run the place. I said, I see you've met the city council and mayor. So just to hit on this point that people are avoiding reality. This is a very obvious point that this gets to a point because people respond when I say the reason that we have gun rights in the United States is to protect us from tyranny. Germans were disarmed. The Jewish population was disarmed in Europe. The Asian populations were generally disarmed. People didn't have a lot of guns. A lot of Americans have a lot of guns. I own rifles. I own a pistol. I have a lot of friends who own a lot of rifles. I have a lot of ammo. I have a lot of friends who have a lot more guns and a lot more ammo than I do. Very hard to carry out the kind of tyrannical acts that the Germans did, let's say, in Europe when the population is so heavily armed. And rifles matter. Really good example of this is look at Afghanistan and look at Vietnam. Two countries that were attacked by the Russians. Afghanistan was attacked by the Russians and then the Americans. Vietnam was attacked by the Americans. You can argue attacked, but Russians and then the Americans invaded Afghanistan, and America invaded effectively Vietnam. And why were they able to fight off these superpowers? They were able to fight off these superpowers because they had some special culture, because they respected LGBTQIA plus rights. Maybe it's because they had a lot of guns. I'm just saying, guns do deter tyranny. You don't have to like it, and tyranny kills a lot more people than the kind of gun deaths we're seeing. And I'm not a fan of the gun deaths we're seeing in America. I'm not a fan of deaths. I'm not a fan of homicide. I would like there to be fewer violent deaths, accidental deaths, etc. One of the things you're going to see in this conversation that I had on Twitter. So I had this conversation here, and this is an example of it. Let me pull this up. You see, kids rarely die from mass shootings in the United States. This was a response to someone who said that it's rare for kids to die in mass shootings in other countries. And it is actually rare for them to die from mass shootings in the United States. It's less than 1 in a million children die from mass shootings in the United States. I would say 1 in a million is rare, and less than 1 in a million is even more rare. So Surfing Hippie Skin Dog said this comment is insensitive and bearing, and Alexandra Mersch, Tesla Boomer Mommer, said it truly is. And I just responded, so you both agree it's accurate, but you don't like it. And Alexandra says, we both agree that you are insensitive. Not the comment was insensitive and bearing, but now I am insensitive and embarrassing. And of course, that's not news to her. And I just said, GFY, go F yourself. This is, it is true that mass shooting deaths for children, school shooting deaths for children are rare in America. Are they more common in America than they are in some other countries? Yes, that is true. But why does that matter? So we end up with this. There was a lot of response to this. I'm not going to get on the Biden stuff. Define rarely. I feel like even once is too much. The genocides are rare, but once is too much. It's hard to carry out a genocide against an armed populace. And this bizarre conversation, this bizarre response. Hi, Giver Text. Thank you for your comment in the chat. This just totally bizarre comment. Let me just go into this. I've got 10 AR-15s to protect myself against genocide, which comes in the form of ballistic missiles. Am I safe? No, I'm not suggesting that AR-15s. First of all, I don't see having 10 AR-15s is going to protect you more than having 1 or 2. Like, a second one is a backup. You can't really carry 10 guns, 10 rifles. They're kind of heavy. I'm not aware that any genocide has been committed with ballistic missiles yet. So, is that a danger? Sure. I have a solution to that problem, which is we should probably disarm governments. I don't think governments should be armed. I'm happy to unilaterally disarm the United States military. I don't think the United States should have a military. I'm fully in favor of that. If that's what you're talking about, I'm happy to talk about that. At the same time, a neighbor's deranged son has one too, but he takes it to a local school for target practice, or the kids at the school armed for safety. And I would argue that adults, and I've said this before, I am licensed to carry a concealed firearm. I carry a pistol with me. When I go into schools, I'm not allowed to bring my gun with me. Well, you have a place with a disarmed population. You have a target rich environment that can't shoot back at you. Why do we make these places that are we take places that we want to be safe, and then we make sure that there's no one to protect the children, or not enough protection for the children? The idea that you're going to have one cop at the school or one veteran at the school is not going to solve the problems. If you had 10 adults who are carrying pistols in the school, there's roughly 100, let's say, adults in a school at a given moment. If 10% of them are carrying and nobody knows which ones are carrying because they're carrying concealed, you're a lot more likely to stop a shooter. And if shooters routinely got stopped by armed adults at the schools, they'd be less likely to shoot up schools because they wouldn't achieve their objective. Now, I'm not saying they're rational, but there are other countries where people have guns, and school shootings aren't as common. I'm not sure why. And I don't know how common school shootings are in other countries. I don't think they report their statistics in the same way. And the people who report school shooting statistics in the United States out and out lie, and we'll cover that in the course of this conversation. So he said it was an extreme view. And I said, what's an extreme view? That genocides are rare, that it's hard to commit genocide against an armed populace. And Rajiv says, extreme as you went from kids being shot in safe places to mass genocide. I didn't say mass genocide. I said genocide. I don't know that there's a difference between genocide and mass genocide. But you notice he avoided the question. And he said, I didn't answer his question. So no, I don't think rifles will protect us from emotional thinkers cannot be reached with reason. Exactly. So let's get back here. Some good stuff along the way. Boring company competitions. I'm not on replies. So let's get back to replies. So this is a conversation with Dave Havasi, who is a former Tesla employee. And I think he's the founder of, can't think of it off the top of my head. He's the founder of one of the leading one of the leading electric vehicle publications on the web. Maybe it says it in his profile. I don't know. Good guy. I've met him in person before. So I brought up one of my main tweets up here was, there's this tweet from an Australian doctor saying, I've never seen a gunshot wound in a child and have not seen a gunshot wound in anyone for over 20 years. Congratulations. I'm sure that there are emergency room physicians in, let's say, Maine or New Hampshire who don't see a lot of gunshot wounds, because the homicide rate in New Hampshire and Maine is very low. There's several states in the United States that have very low homicide rates. And so if you are in an inner city in the United States, you're going to see a lot of gunshot wounds because we have a lot of violent crime in our inner cities. But that doesn't mean that we have a lot of violent crime in other places in the United States. This is misleading. Not seen a gunshot wound in anyone for over 20 years. There are guns in Australia. I don't know. This is weird. And he says this. So anyway, I said that foreigners are completely unaware of cultural and demographic differences between this country, their country, and the United States. So I want to be clear about this right off the bat. The United States is very variable, and we're going to get to this. I think I have it down here. So this is states with low homicide rates. So New Hampshire's homicide rate, 0.9 in 2020, is lower than Canada, I believe, and lower than Belgium and Greece and some other European countries. And you can see that New Hampshire's homicide rate is generally consistently low. 0.9 is lower than usual, but their homicide rate is in the low ones, usually. 2.4 in 2019 was unusual. Maine also has a low homicide rate. Vermont has a low homicide rate. These three states are, for those who aren't familiar with the United States, these are three states in the Northeast that are adjacent to each other. Maine is the northeast corner of the United States. New Hampshire is next to it, and Vermont is next to it. New Hampshire has no significant gun laws. It is one of the most libertarian states, if not the most libertarian state. You can carry concealed without a license. You can carry openly without a license. Adults can carry guns in schools. As far as I know, New Hampshire has never had a school shooting. I don't know if they've ever had a mass shooting. I think there was a shooting in a New Hampshire school where a kid brought a gun and shot himself, but didn't shoot others. So the story that we're told, and I just want to contrast this with, and you can look at Idaho, Massachusetts, you can see the states that have low homicide rates. And these are homicide rates, not gun homicide rates. I personally don't care if my kid is killed with a gun or without a gun. If my kid is killed, my kid is dead, and I don't want my kid to be killed. These are the places with the worst homicide rates: District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Louisiana, Missouri, Mississippi, Arkansas, and South Carolina, all above 10. Rates vary by year and everything, but these are the states that all have, generally speaking, much higher homicide rates. District of Columbia's homicide rate is 30 times the homicide rate of New Hampshire. On a consistent basis, it's probably 20 times, and Puerto Rico also in the ballpark of 20 times the homicide rate of New Hampshire. So if you actually care, you have to sort of define, what problem are you concerned about, right? Are you concerned about school shootings when white children are shot in a school filled with white people? Or are you concerned about gun deaths? Or are you concerned about violent crime? Or are you concerned about homicides in general? You got to pick what you're excited, what problem do you want to solve? Now, I personally am much more concerned with the much higher volume of children and adults who are killed in our urban violence, and the mass amounts of urban violence we have in places like Chicago. And let me look at these numbers again. This is this is way higher than average for the United States. And if you wanted to seriously understand the problem of violent crime in the United States and homicides in the United States, you would probably want to think about, why is the District of Columbia so much more violent than New Hampshire? Why is New Hampshire so relatively safe? New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, why are they so relatively safe? Why are the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Louisiana so dangerous? What is it that leads to so much higher rates of homicides in these places? If you want to address the violent crime rate, the homicide rate, the gun violence rate, whatever, you probably want to focus on the places that have the biggest rates and say, why do they have so much violent crime? And you want to look at the places that don't have it and say, how come these places are so peaceful? And these are questions that, see, what happens is you have an incident like a shooting. You have a shooting that gets media attention, right? The shootings in Chicago don't get media attention. The shootings in Washington, D.C., like, think about this for yourself. Just for yourself, think about this for a second. How many times have you read articles in the national news about shootings that happen in Washington, D.C.? Right? You know from this chart that Washington, D.C. has the highest homicide rate in the United States, by far, consistently. And that Puerto Rico has a high homicide rate, second. It does occasionally battle DC for the highest number. 2017, Puerto Rico was worse. 2014, Puerto Rico was, but it appears that DC actually has a worse homicide rate than Puerto Rico. Why don't these murders make the news? Why aren't they in the national news? Is it because black children are being killed or Latino children are being killed? Is it because that's over there? Why is it only when white children get killed that we get a big media story? Why is that the story? Why is that the issue that draws attention? And when I present that to people who are making this point, they can't have that conversation. So Dave, and again, I like Dave. He's a good person, okay? Dave says, show all the charts you want. Year to date, there have been more school shootings than days of the year. Now, that's totally false. That's absolutely ridiculous. It is true that there are lying media outlets and lying nonprofits that are exaggerating school shootings. They are exaggerating school shootings. It is not true. So he brings up this point, and I'll probably find it later. The way that school shootings are counted in the United States is false by the people who count them. There was a school shooting. I lived in Palm Beach County, Florida. There's a school in Palm Beach County, Florida called Dreyfoos, Dreyfoos. It's a charter, not a charter school. It's a magnet school for the arts, and probably the best school in Palm Beach, best high school in Palm Beach County. And there was a shooting on the campus. Somebody broke into the campus, and police shot him. Police shot a criminal on the in the school. Now, do you consider, is that the kind of school shooting problem that you're concerned about, when police shoot a criminal? And if you go through the supposed data, the data of these places that claim there are this many school shootings, what you find is there's a shooting, that school's closed, there's a football game going on, and there's a shooting in the parking lot. Right? Not a shooting inside the school. Adults shooting each other. right? There's a shooting on the street outside of a school, and they call it a school shooting. School's not in session. You know, so but but Dave focuses on year to date. There've been more school shootings than days of the year, as if this is the big problem. He says that's a big problem. So first of all, it's a phony problem because the number of school shootings is nowhere near that large. That's only if you arbitrarily define anything that happens within a mile of a school as a school shooting. There is a much bigger problem that we could solve. But here's another detail here that Dave says it's a problem that practically no other industrialized country has. And I've been back and forth with him on this in our tweets. Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia have much higher homicide rates than the United States, and they are industrialized countries. And he dismisses Latin American industrialized countries. And then he says 3 Latin American countries represent a tiny fraction of global industrialized countries. Does he realize that Brazil is one of the largest populations in the world? I think Brazil's population is similar to the US. Brazil has 214 million people. Mexico has 126 million people. So between Brazil and Mexico, they have a greater population than the United States, probably greater than the United States and Canada together. So, you're going to say Belgium is one of the dozens of industrialized countries. And he said that they've solved systemic gun violence. Well, they've temporarily solved systemic gun violence until the next war. And it's calling it systemic violence. Was this really a systemic shooting? Are these school shootings systemic? What does it mean to call them systemic? What happens is people get so caught up, and Dave is a smart guy. He's a well-educated guy. And people who are well-educated and intelligent who get caught up in the story that guns are the problem, they resort to big words like systemic and industrialized countries. He said counties by mistake there, but countries, a statistical outlier, use big words to make your case and ignore the facts. There have been 128 mass shootings so far this year. Sure, there have. Sure, I'm sure that that's true. And then, here's the thing. Do you think that 6,000 kids shot per year is an acceptable number of sacrificial lambs slaughtered at the altar of the gun? Okay, so this is where you get to. People who are so committed to their view that guns are the problem believe that anyone who doesn't support their view of banning all guns, right? I don't know what solution you have, Dave. We haven't gotten to your solution yet. But if the solution is banning all guns, no, I don't support that. That doesn't mean I want children to die. I know that children will die. I know it is a consequence of having more guns in the country. I don't think your solutions are going to reduce homicides. That's the thing that, the conversation we can't have is they won't offer meaning. If you try to pin somebody down to a meaningful solution, well, what solution do you want? Well, I want to ban assault rifles. Well, assault rifles are already banned, and rifles in general are very rarely used in crimes. The most common gun crimes, most common gun homicides, let's say, or homicides, whatever, are pistols, not assault rifles. Assault rifle, just so people understand this, the technical definition of assault rifle is probably going to come up later. The technical definition of assault rifle is one that's capable of automatic fire. Now, I own 3 rifles and none of them are capable of automatic fire, but 2 of them would be considered assault weapons by people like David, who don't actually care about definitions. And as a criminal defense lawyer, I'm going to say, if you're going to say we're going to make something illegal, you've got to define what it is you're going to make illegal. And if you're saying you're going to make assault rifles illegal, and they have to be fully automatic to be assault rifles or capable of automatic fire to be assault rifles, well, I don't own any of those. And frankly, those are rare. You can get a special license to get them. Police have them. I don't know why it's okay for police to have them. They have automatic rifles capable of at least burst fire. Do you want to take away assault rifles from police? I don't think so. So let's see. Just getting to more of this. So we're having this conversation, and Futurama King said it was a stupid comment I made. Per 1,000 kids in the United States, there are more gun violence deaths than any other country. I don't think that's true. Any other country is the kind of bullshit that people will say when they don't know better, right? Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico have much higher homicide rates than the United States. I'm going to guess that homicides of people under the age of 18, including 15. There's a lot of violent crime happens in the age range of 14 to 17, right? So our gun deaths for children rate, you'll have an incident where elementary school children are killed, and then people say, "Oh, there's too many children killed by guns in the United States," and they're including people aged 14 to 17, right? And people aged 14 to 17, or it might even include 18 and 19. And that age range has a lot of has a lot of gun deaths because a lot of kids that age in the inner city get involved in gangs or drug trafficking or other issues like that. That that pumps up the count. That's where District of Columbia and maybe, I'm not even sure I understand Puerto Rico's violent crime problem, and Chicago. Where do they get all their violent crimes from? Where are all these children getting killed by guns? Well, they're mostly 14 to 17-year-old or 14 to 19-year-old, and I'm sorry to say it, they're largely black and Latino. And it's only when white children, when white elementary school children get killed, or white children get killed, that all of a sudden it becomes a national news story. When black and Latino children, when children of color get killed in inner cities in America, we don't talk about that. That doesn't get media attention because that doesn't serve the narrative. So he says this is a totally preventable thing. Totally preventable, really? Is it really totally preventable? How is that totally preventable? What manner of prevention are you going to use? What are you going to prohibit? What law are you going to pass that's actually going to totally... See, this is another lie. Listen, we don't want to ban all guns, but it's totally preventable. Well, if you're not going to ban all guns, then you're not totally preventing it. So come, give me a solution we can talk about. So just as an example, countries with the highest rates of violent gun death per 100,000 residents in 2019, the United States is not on the list. U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico are on the list, but nobody wants to talk about that, right? El Salvador, Venezuela, Guatemala, Colombia, and Brazil are industrialized countries. Mexico is number 10 on the list. Mexico is an industrialized country. Giga Mexico is coming, right? Tesla has there's a lot of industry in Mexico supporting the U.S. auto industry and other parts, and for its own country. Brazil is one of the most powerful industrialized nations in the world. It's got a fairly large economy. It's got a fairly large population. Colombia, why do these countries have such high rates of violent gun deaths? Somebody will say that we have higher gun deaths than other countries in the world. Why are you leaving out all these places? Right? Because black and brown people don't matter. Right? It's only when white people die. It's only when it's only when Europeans die. When European Americans die or whatever, that they count it. This is total gun violence, not kids. Yeah, well, maybe they don't count their children dead. You really think a place that has 20 times, I think our gun death rate is probably around 5. So these countries all have 4 or 5 plus times the gun deaths that we do. Do you really think that their 15 to 17-year-olds aren't getting shot? Do you really think that? And then, I asked, why are school shooting statistics more important than total homicides? And it was the topic of your original tweet in this thread. Not exactly. It's an important subset of gun violence. No, it's not an important subset. It's only an important subset of gun violence, and I said this. He says it's strangely common in the USA. It's not common in the USA. It's quite uncommon. School shootings are rare. They'll come up with these bullshit statistics that, there's more gun deaths than there are, more school shootings than there are days. I mean, if there was a school shooting every day, don't you think there'd be a news story every day about the school shooting? The school shooting of the day? Why aren't we getting news stories every day about a different school shooting? Because they're not really school shootings. Because if they actually reported on the police officer shooting someone in a school and they called it a school shooting, people would see through the lie. Right? It's an unimportant subset of gun violence unless you don't care about black and Latino teens gunned down in our cities. And I want to be clear, I have a partial solution. I don't think there's a complete solution to the problem of gun violence in America or violent crime in America. My partial solution is end the drug war. End the prohibition of drugs, make drugs completely legal, right? Alcohol prohibition got a lot of people killed. There was a lot of violent crime that was a result of alcohol prohibition. We know that prohibitionist policies lead to a lot of violent crime. We know it. This is a fact. This is not a question. This is a historical fact. Everybody knows this. Anybody who wants to think about it knows it. So legalize all drugs. I'm not talking about decriminalize possession. I'm talking about legalize all drugs. Let people buy whatever drug they want from a pharmacist without a prescription or with a prescription. I don't care, but preferably without a prescription. You can go to the pharmacist and you get fentanyl. You can go to the pharmacist and maybe you sell marijuana in tobacco shops. And I guess marijuana is already sort of almost completely legal. You want to get OxyContin, you can get OxyContin. Let people buy what drugs they want. Stop trying to control people's decisions about what they do with their body. And then you won't have illegal trade in drugs, and you won't have violence over who gets to sell drugs in different places. Big PYGKLB says a fair number of teens also commit suicide by gun. I'm not sure how this can be addressed, but I doubt that the ban of assault rifles would make one bit of difference. Yes, and also Japan has double the suicide rate of the United States, and they don't have guns. So it's probably true that if we didn't have guns, our suicide problem, fewer suicides would be successful. But I don't think that's, the suicide problem is a very big problem, and I would love to address that. And I think the answer to that is let's stop trying to control kids. Let's start giving kids values again. Let's start giving kids. Let's stop trying to change society into something, some Marxist fantasy. That would be my take on that. So, getting back here. This is the one they countered as a school shooting. Suspects shot to death by police in the Dreyfus School. Right? The van crashed into I think crashed through the gate. Suspect or whoever it was walking around the school. Not I think it was a former student, and police officer shot the student. Shot the perpetrator. So just getting here to so Dave here says genocide is the intentional killing of a certain demographic. Really? Really? 6,000 kids were shot in America last year, extrapolate a decade and 60,000 kids. So he's calling the random pattern of violence, which is he calls it systemic violent crime in America. He's calling that a genocide. Do you find that credible? I do not find that credible. I think that this is an educated, intelligent person so desperate to defend his policy view that we need to ban guns that he's just stretching himself beyond belief. So Dave S. says, so I'm clear, nothing to see here, nothing can be done. We accept the rate of road traffic accidents and child fatalities because of the benefits of roads and vehicles. Therefore, Americans should accept mass school shootings because of gun rights benefits. And I never said nothing can be done. What problem are you trying to solve? You want to reduce violent crime, end the war on drugs, legalize all drugs. That problem solved. I mean, it's not a complete solution, but it is a significant solution. A lot of violent crime is domestic violence. That's not going to solve domestic violence. But there's a lot of crime related to drugs, and a lot of it is because of the prohibition. Reduce school shooting deaths. Let licensed adults carry in schools. That'll reduce school shooting deaths. Kevin Clear, this is tell that to the parents of all the dead children killed in school shootings. Thanks for letting everyone know you don't care about kids who are killed in other settings. There's lots of parents who lose children in Washington, D.C. to gun violence and other violence, but that doesn't matter. All that matters is when white children are killed in schools. So, it was. This was funny. In response to my tweet, Robert McLaughlin says, have you ever wondered why you're divorced and having a hard time finding a partner? Perhaps the problem is being you, just saying. I think they might be right. I don't think that's why I'm divorced. And me being me is probably, maybe me being me is why I'm divorced. I don't think it has to do with my views on guns, though. Let's keep going here. I'm going to avoid the Joe Biden thing. Nowhere is safe when guns are allowed to roam the streets. So I had this, post, and somebody says no one is safe when guns are allowed to roam the streets. Actually, guns are allowed to roam the streets in New Hampshire, and you're about as safe in New Hampshire as you're going to be anywhere in the world. Guns are allowed in Vermont. Guns are allowed in Maine. I'm in Florida. I'm in Melbourne, Florida. Guns are commonplace in most of Florida, rural Florida. I feel very safe in Florida. The fact that law-abiding citizens carry guns means that criminals have to be afraid of who they pick on, and you can ignore that if you want to. But the reality is, places where people have guns, a little safer. Victor Block says in the chat. Sorry, in the chat, Victor. If you're watching this, you might not be able to watching this later. You might not be able to see the chat. These anti-gun nuts are the most violent people in the world. They have Mao, Hitler, the Soviet Union, all socialists who have murdered more people in the last 100 years by far than any other time in history. I'd go a little more than 100 years, but yes. They like gun control, control over guns so they can dominate us. They'll never take guns away from the government, right? They don't want to take guns away from the police or the army or the military. They only want to take guns away from us. Hand over your gun to them and see what happens. The shooting violence today is the result of liberalism, which attacks the family, promotes feminism and divorce. I'm a little iffy there. I think there is a good feminism. I think there's some good aspects to feminism. I think women should have equal rights. Ram says, I want to move to New Hampshire, but I don't like the common law marriage laws. I don't know what that is. I don't know anything about common law marriage laws in New Hampshire. I can't comment on that. So anyway, I responded, nowhere is safe when only the government has guns. You look at history. I mean, I guess I have this question. Do you think that we haven't had massive, we haven't had a tyrannical takeover of the United States because our government officials are such nice people? We have such good, honest, decent people running our country, and that's why tyranny hasn't taken over the United States? Or maybe it's because they know they can't win. I mean, the Civil War was a really good example of this. Barbados says all adults in Finland have guns. You do have a point about drugs. Thank you. Thank you, Barbados. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know enough about Finland to comment on that. But people are in denial about the danger of tyranny. And tyranny kills a lot more people than the things that we're talking about. It's very easy to focus on, well, we just had this gun death, this shooting yesterday, and ignore the mass violence that occurred when tyranny was allowed to take over Europe. When tyrants were allowed to exercise power in Europe and Asia and Africa, when tyranny runs free and is not checked by civilian guns, we've seen what happens. I'm much more concerned about the millions or tens of millions killed by governments than I am about and I don't like these shootings. I don't think these are a good thing. I worked as a substitute teacher in a school. I don't think that we have good solutions to make our schools safe unless we let licensed adults carry guns concealed. So Ram says the Second Amendment was put in by the Founding Fathers to protect the rest of the Constitution when the First Amendment fails. Well, the First Amendment is pretty much on edge with the censorship that happened in COVID. And the Second Amendment, I'm not sure that's exactly why the Second Amendment was put in, but I don't think you're wrong. So anyway, let me go back here. So this was a comment. Let's go back to the rare thing. I started this off by saying foreigners are unaware of cultural and demographic differences. Alexandra said, please explain your cultural difference that thinks, explain me please your cultural difference that thinks we need guns in the hands of private citizens to defend liberty. So for people who are saying they don't want to ban guns, why is she saying that she doesn't think private citizens, why do we need guns in the hands of private citizens? She didn't say AR-15s or assault rifles. She said guns. So she pretty clearly wants to ban all guns. That's how I translate that. Lethal Low says U.S. guns equals dead kids. We okay with that? Rest of world, no guns, please, no dead kids. Rest of world, really? Children don't die in other countries. Complete ignorance of Latin America, Africa. I'm not sure about, let's say, Pakistan, Afghanistan. I don't know how many children die in those countries. The data doesn't lie, but kids die in other countries, but rarely from mass shootings. The frequency is a tiny fraction. Why? Gun controls. And I said kids rarely die from mass shootings in the United States, and this is true, and it's insensitive, embarrassing, blah, blah, blah. And I just pointed out, on average, fewer than 35 children and teens, notice children and teens, are killed as a result of mass shootings a year. There's 75 million people in the United States under the age of 20, and 35 a year are killed as a result of mass shootings. That's less than 1 in a million. That's 1 in 2 million. That's less than 1 in 2 million. That's rare by pretty much any definition of rare. Less than 1 in a million is rare. As a parent, I was concerned about the dangers of my kids faced in schools. I was somewhat concerned about school shootings, given that my kids went to school in Boca Raton, and there was a school shooting in Parkland, like 5 miles away, as the crow flies. But I was much more concerned about my children's safety in a car. and I put my kids in safe cars. I did not. My youngest child drives my Tesla Model 3 rather than the Volkswagen Passat that I had, because I want my youngest child in the safest car possible. I typically drove decent, reasonable sized SUVs because they're safer because of their mass. If you want to protect your children, then don't drive in small cars. That's a very likely way your children get named or killed in America today. The odds of your child getting killed in a school shooting are extremely low. That is, way down the list of how your child is likely to die. If you live in an inner city characterized by a lot of street violence, gang violence, and other problems, then yeah, your children are a lot more likely to die by gunfire. But if you live in a suburban neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of crime, doesn't have a lot of violent crime, then the risk to your child is extremely low. And if you're concerned about the risk to children in America from guns, or the risk to people in America from guns, then and violent crime in general, then you should probably try to figure out, why is there all this violent crime in our cities and what can we do about that? And I can tell you that the people who want to ban guns are not talking about that. And then Alexandra goes, every single one is too much. Yeah, every single one is too much. I just responded to that. Well, how many people did tyranny kill in the 20th century? One is too many, right? And I pointed this out. I said kids rarely die from mass shootings. I backed it up. How do you define rare? And we just don't. And then DGW says, what does rare have to do with it? That was how it started. And then there's like, somebody comes up, this is an absolute bullshit statistic, right? I don't know where this chart comes from, but supposedly the number of shootings at schools spiked in, I guess it's like 2018, 2019, whatever. Wait a minute. Schools were closed in 2020 and 2021. My kids were kept home from school. How did this number not go down when the schools were closed? Doesn't make any sense. Like, I didn't go through this to figure out what the hell they're talking about, but there was a period of time when the schools were closed. Like, I think my kids were home for school for about a year. How did the number not dip then? And this is a point I hit on this point a lot. Try comparing the U.S. Try comparing between states. And so here's some, excuse my French, but some asshat who says, because he's in a country, I think he's in Switzerland. I'm in a country with more people than the whole USA. I thought he said he was in, where is he? That is Zurich, Switzerland. I don't know where he is now. Currently in a country with more people in the USA, and there's no significant gun deaths that you know of. Not a country with the best government. He's not saying where. He lives in Switzerland. It'd be nice if you worry about, how about you worry about your own country? We'll take care of ours. And Chubba Godini, again, who is this guy? Where is he? Planet Earth. It looks, I'm guessing that's Eastern European. Got a Ukraine flag in his, of course, Ukraine flag. More than 6,000 children, 17 years old or younger, killed or injured by gunfire in 2022. U.S. population is about 333 million, so it's not rare at all. What are we talking? What problem are we trying to solve? I am very concerned about the number of people who are killed by guns or killed in general by homicide in the United States. But if you're going to bring up school shootings and you think that's going to solve the number, if 35 children are killed by guns in 2022, I don't even think it's that high, and 6,000 children are killed by guns, why would you focus on school shootings as the problem if you're concerned about the 6,000 children, 6,000 of whom were not killed in schools? So when your kid dies, it's always one too many. Kids die all kinds of ways. It's always one too many. I agree with that. So this was in response to, I brought up this cultural difference. I said, our homicide rate varies a lot by location. New Hampshire has no gun restrictions and lowest homicide rate in the nation. Puerto Rico has the strictest gun laws and the highest homicide rate. Maybe that's cultural. And Alexandra avoids that. And I come back. Please explain the variance between New Hampshire and Puerto Rico. No answer. Alexandra is engaging in this fight with me for whatever reason, whatever games that she likes to play. But she won't address this. See, you can't. The thing is, if you start to acknowledge that there's a cultural difference between Puerto Rico and New Hampshire, then liberals get uncomfortable with that. They don't want to acknowledge that there might be a bigger crime problem in Latin American communities or black communities than there are in white communities. They don't want to acknowledge it. It's the simple truth. Maine and New Hampshire are two of the whitest states in the nation. Very small black and Latino populations, and strangely, they have small gun death rates. Maybe there's a connection, maybe there isn't. You'd probably want to understand if you actually cared about the homicide problem in America, the gun violence problem in America, whatever. You'd probably want, I think it would be a rational thing to say, let's take a look at places where the most crime happens. Let's take a look at the places where the least crime happens. Let's try to figure out what the difference is. Is it the gun laws? No. Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico have the strictest gun laws in the country. At least historically, they've had the strictest gun laws in the country. And New Hampshire has the least restrictive gun laws in the country. And yet New Hampshire has the low homicide rate. Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. have the high homicide rate. So PYGKLB, I don't know. I mean, I'm not having a connection problem. It might be you. So, and then Greg Gutman, this is the quasi anonymous account. Are you sure Puerto Rico has the strictest gun laws? Gun sales have soared since the 2020 law made the process faster, easier, and cheaper. And I just asked, what was the homicide rate before? And he said, are you looking at only the homicide rate, gun violence, violence crimes? I mean, if someone gets shot and they survive, it's certainly better than dying, but it's not as good as not getting shot in the first place. Are you okay with it being one of the biggest killers of children in the United States? And why are you changing the subject? Puerto Rico homicide rate is 20x the New Hampshire rate. Are you okay with that? Do you think understanding the reason for this difference would help reduce homicides? You're comparing apples to oranges. Puerto Rico is a U.S. territory, not a U.S. state. Who cares? It's the United States. Why does that matter? If you're talking about the homicide rate in the United States, Puerto Rico is part of the United States. You go, District of Columbia is not a state. I guess District of Columbia doesn't count. The people in these places don't count. The original contact was about guns. I made the point that deaths are a subset of the problem. You're ignoring this and focusing on homicide. Is this homicide rate with only guns? Well, why are you focusing on guns instead of isn't homicide the problem we should be worried about? I mean, if people have guns and they're not killing people, that doesn't seem to be a problem. If people are dying from things other than guns, I think that is a problem. I'm much more like, I don't care. People bring up if it was your child. If my child was killed by a car, by a knife, by a gun, by a bomb, I'm not going to be happy. It's not going to matter to me one way or the other which one killed my kid. I don't want my kid to die. Nobody wants their children. Almost no one wants their children to die. So this silly argument is just insane. Puerto Rico has a ton more gang violence than we do, which you're not going to see in New Hampshire. Interesting. Puerto Rico doesn't have a lot of mass shootings like the continental United States. Are you sure about that? How are we defining mass shooting? I'm not convinced that Puerto Rico has fewer mass shootings than the rest of the continental United States. Are they just not counting them? Maybe they're not counting mass shootings. There's certainly a lot of shootings there. And yes, gang violence. Well, why is there gang violence? Let's address the gang violence problem. Maybe we could address that problem. And I'll tell you what, banning assault rifles is not going to solve that problem. Banning AR-15s, the gangs aren't using AR-15s. They're using pistols. I would bet you, I don't know the numbers. I haven't looked at the numbers. I would bet you that the vast majority of guns used in violent crime and gun crimes in Puerto Rico are pistols. I know it from FBI statistics nationwide that only 3% or 4% of gun homicides in the United States are done with rifles or long guns, which is rifles and shotguns, including both AR-15 type rifles and AK-47 type rifles, and deer hunting rifles and all other rifles and all shotguns. So the number of AR-15s that are used in killings is extremely small as a share of the shootings. So he says this was a bit. He says, after declining rates through 2020, the government in Puerto Rico has made it far easier to people to buy guns, and they have bought a lot more guns. Okay, so declining rates through 2020. So what we had a brief dip in 2020. But the years before 2020, we had increasing homicide rates. 2014 was 18.4. The homicide rate jumped from 2015 to 2016 and stayed high through 2019. Then it dipped in 2020. So, but still, their best year, 2020 was still like triple the U.S. rate, the total U.S. rate for homicides. So they just, you know, he's looking at different data. I don't know. You're cherry picking a year. 2020 was a year that had a low homicide rate. You're just cherry picking a year. Children are being gunned down by the thousands. In 2020, there were 4,484 deaths due to firearms among children and adolescents aged 0 to 17 in the United States. All right, now wait a minute. Somebody else is saying there's more than 6,000, and now we've got 4,484. How many of these are suicides? Right? We don't know the answer to that question. Are we concerned about this? Like, I don't know where these. I don't know how we only had 4,500 in 2020 and we're over 6,000 in 2022. I don't know how that happened. Merch at elonbits.com. Supporters get a discount code if you ask me for it. It's published there somewhere. Be less wrong shirt also. So I'm looking to be less wrong, and I'm waiting for somebody to explain to me. For example, there's some simple questions. I'm gonna close this up with this. There's some simple questions we could address. What solution are you proposing to this problem? Right? Let's define. First of all, what problem are you trying to solve? Okay, are you trying to solve the school shooting problem? Are you trying to solve the mass shooting problem? Are you trying to solve the problem of children getting killed in America? Are you trying to solve the problem of children under the age of 10 being killed in America? Are you trying to solve the problem of the homicide problem in general in America? Are you trying to solve the violent crime problem in America? Which problem are you trying to solve? Or are you really trying to solve the problem, I don't like guns, so I don't want other people to have them? Right? But let's identify what problem are you trying to solve, and let's try to figure out what solutions. Now, the most common solutions we see are assault weapons bans, which we had one from 1994 to 2004, and it didn't solve any problems. Assault weapons ban didn't work. Assault weapons, by the way, I just want to address this really quickly. Assault weapon is a term that was made up in 1994 by in the Clinton gun ban. That term did not really exist in common use before. Assault rifle is a term that's existed since roughly World War II, when the Germans came up with the Sturmgewehr. Is called the storm rifle, which became known as the assault rifle, for storming or assaulting a position, not for assaulting a person. No one knows the history of that. Assault weapon is like, it's just a total made up term. If you ask somebody to define assault weapon, like somebody who wants to ban them, all right, define it for me. What exactly is it? Well, guns that are scary. No. Look, I'm a lawyer. If my client is gonna be prosecuted for having a weapon that is considered an assault weapon or an assault rifle, you got to define what it is that you're banning so he can know what he can and can't carry. Right? If you don't define what it is that you're banning, and they won't go with a definition, and they'll say we need background checks. We have background checks. The vast majority of these shooters passed background checks. The Parkland shooter was living with an FBI profiler who knew he had an AR-15. You can't make this stuff up. You just can't make this stuff up. Take this off this. I'm wrapping this up. So, what's your solution? If you want to stop, first of all, the idea that you're going to ban guns and then all the criminals are going to turn them in is pretty blind. Okay, because the vast majority, just an example, if you look at violent crime in America, gun violence in America today, the vast majority of violent crimes with guns in America today are with guns that are not lawfully owned or possessed. Lawful gun owners, law-abiding gun owners like myself, with a concealed carry license, we very rarely commit crimes. We actually, there have been studies that people with concealed carry licenses commit fewer crimes than police officers. I can find the study for somebody if they want me to find it for them. So the problem is not what guns I have. The problem is not what law-abiding gun owners have. There are a variety of problems. There's a mental health problem we should probably try to address. I'm not sure what the solution to that is. I'm not convinced that the current approach of the left to the transgender community is making problems safer. I don't think it's a big part of the problem. But, we've had a few incidents now where people who are transgender are committing these shootings. I tend to think that's not really the issue. If your concern is making schools safer, My solution is very straightforward. Let licensed, responsible adults carry in schools. If you want to, if I'm going to be in a school and you want me to make me go, I was a substitute teacher. If you wanted me to go through an 8-hour course on how to carry safely in schools, fine. I mean, I know the answer. Keep it concealed. Don't pull it out. Don't shoot unless you know what's behind your target. People don't know this because people who aren't trained in firearm safety don't know this. You have to know not only what you're shooting at, which is important. You have to know what you're shooting at. This is why you want to carry a flashlight if you're carrying a gun at night, right? My pistol has a light on it, and I carry a flashlight, right? But you want to be able to see what you're shooting at. You also want to know what's behind what you're shooting at because there's a good chance you're going to miss. And you don't want to harm somebody else when you miss. So these are things that you need to know, and especially if you're in a school environment, there might be a lot of children around. You want to be careful that you take a position where whoever is behind the target, there's no people behind the target, right? I mean, these are things that you need to think about, and maybe they need to do some kind of training for people who carry guns in schools. But I'm just going to say this: if somebody's going to come to school and shoot up the school, I would much rather there are adults in the school, responsible, licensed, responsible adults who are carrying pistols who can try to stop the shooter. 10 of them, 20 of them. I would much rather have my kid in a school that had 10 or 20 armed adults ready to defend them than because, you know, if shooters know, if people who are thinking about shooting up a school know there's not going to be anybody to shoot back at me, or they shoot the cop first, right? I mean, that's a terrible job being a school cop. If the school shooter comes to the school, you're the target, or they just watch where you're going and go somewhere else. One person with a gun does not solve the problem. Generally speaking, that's not a great solution to the problem. You have this big sprawling campus, and we saw in the Parkland shooting that the police officer did not really solve the problem, right? But if you have armed adults inside the schools who are in harm's way, they're at least going to defend themselves. You got a better shot of stopping this problem if you do that. So but the background check thing, baloney. Show me a mass shooting that happened without a background check. Show me a shooting in Chicago or Washington, D.C. or Puerto Rico where they care about background. The shooters cared about background checks. They're getting their guns illegally. They're going to get their guns illegally. If you make me jump through more hoops to get my gun, you're not solving any problems. Oh, you're going to have, and then people will say, well, we need to stop mentally ill people from having guns. Really? So every police officer with PTSD can't carry a gun anymore? Has it occurred to you that if you try to base gun ownership or gun possession rights on mental health diagnosis, that people will not go to get that will not go seek mental health counseling? The mental health counselors recognized this, and they said, no, don't condition gun rights on people with mental health diagnoses because people will stop getting people won't go to a psychologist or a social worker if they become aware. Let's say you're a hunter, you live in a hunting community, and you learn, I'm not going to be able to hunt if I get diagnosed with a mental illness. Well, then they're not going to go get diagnosed for mental illnesses. They're not going to get treated, and you're going to have a bigger mental health problem. And they're still going to have guns. So that doesn't sound so. You have a lot of very off the cuff, short answers to problems. They don't define the problems well. Like, what problem are you trying to solve? Why is this the problem you're trying to solve? You try to have that conversation. You can't have that conversation because they can't. What's your solution? They don't have a clear solution. If they do have a clear, and look, let's say the solution is we're going to ban all guns. Well, good luck getting that one through. Florida ain't going for that. That's not going to happen in Florida. And if you want to have a revolution, I'll tell you what. Like, I know a lot of gun owners. You want to have a revolution? Try banning all guns in the United States. Good luck. Number one, I lost mine in a boating accident. It's going to be the most common phrase in America. It's going to be a T-shirt. I lost mine in a boating accident. Good luck. Who's going to take them away? Who's going to come and take my guns away? Men with guns, right? You're going to send men with guns to take away my guns because you think we shouldn't have guns, but you're going to send men with guns to do it. And then you're going to make those guys turn their guns in? You think they're going to turn their guns in? No. Taking all the guns away isn't a solution. Your assault rifle BS is not a solution. Your assault weapons thing is not a solution. We have demographic issues in the United States that you don't want to confront because you're liberal and you don't want to acknowledge that there's more crime in black communities and there's more crime in Latin America and Latino communities. I want to be clear, not all black communities, not all Latino communities. Maryland, surprisingly, has a relatively low violent crime rate compared to, when you look at I've mapped this out before, and there's a roughly 80% correlation. But there's places that don't have a high black population, that don't have that do have a high black population and don't have a high crime rate, or don't have a high black population and do have a high crime rate. These things happen. These numbers aren't perfect. But if you wanted to genuinely understand the violent crime problem, you'd probably want to figure out why there's so much violent crime in Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., and why there isn't in New Hampshire. If you're not interested in that question, then you're not really interested in solving any problems. That's it. You're not interested in why Washington, D.C. has more crime than New Hampshire. Puerto Rico has more crime than New Hampshire. Louisiana has more crime than New Hampshire. Vermont, Maine, whatever. You're not interested in that question, then you're not really interested in solving any problems. What's happened is you've decided guns bad, and you're making the argument guns are bad because, and you're ignoring the, well, wait a minute, you've raised this issue. Let's look at this other angle at the problem. No, because you can't be wrong, right? We should try to be less wrong. I'm open. I'm listening. But I'm asking questions about New Hampshire and Puerto Rico, and you're not answering them. I'm asking questions about Washington, D.C. and Chicago, and you're not answering those questions. You're not answering those questions because you know they take you away from the solution that you fantasize is going to solve something that isn't going to solve anything. All right, I'm going to stop ranting. Let me just check the chat to see if there's any other comments. I don't see any other comments. I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you all for watching. I am going to post this on YouTube. It is likely not going to be monetized. We'll see. So I want to wish everyone well. Thank you in particular to people who support me here on the Locals platform. Please consider supporting me on the Locals platform if you don't already. Support me on Patreon. Support me on as a YouTube channel member. Support me as a subscriber on Twitter. And thanks everybody so much for watching, and again for your support. T-shirts at elonbits.com. Stainless steel water bottle at elonbits.com. Bye-bye.